abyss. On the rocky ledge lay a man, his leg pinned, his breath shallow. Hours had passed and the cold was closing in. Alone injured, he had little hope left. But then, out of the shadows appeared a shape no one expected. A wolf. Its eyes caught the dim light glinting with something more than instinct. Instead of attacking, the animal lifted its head to the sky and let out a long, haunting howl that echoed across the mountains. What if I told you that howl would save a man's life? Would you believe that a wild wolf could repay a human for an act of kindness? This is not a legend. This is a true story of survival gratitude and an unlikely bond between man and wolf. And what happened next shocked everyone. Before the howl in the canyon, before the impossible rescue, there was a man who lived his life between two worlds, the world of people and the untamed wilderness. His name was Daniel Hartman, a wilderness guide who had spent more than a decade leading travelers into the remote forests of the northern Rockies. Daniel wasn't just a guide, he was a storyteller, a teacher, and at times a guardian. He grew up in a small Montana town where the forest began at the edge of his backyard. His father was a park ranger, his mother a school teacher who loved folklore. From them, Daniel learned both the science and the stories of the land. He carried that mix into his adult life, the precision of tracking wildlife and the wonder of sharing it with those who had never set foot in such places. The northern Rockies are unforgiving. Winters are long snow presses down heavy on the pines, and the wind can cut straight through bone. Yet they are also breathtaking valleys carved by glaciers, rivers flashing like silver under the sun, and the echo of wolves that once ruled this land. Wolves once there were millions. 2 million gray wolves roamed across North America, filling forests, grasslands, and tundra with their presence. But by the early 20th century, relentless hunting and government extermination campaigns had driven them to the edge of extinction in the United States. By the 1970s, wolves were gone from most of the lower 48 states. Daniel knew this history well. He had read about the reintroduction programs, especially in Yellowstone National Park, where wolves were brought back in the 1990s. Their return reshaped entire ecosystems. Elk herds moved differently. Vegetation grew back rivers, even changed course. Science called it a trophic cascade. To Daniel, it was proof of balance restored. Still, outside protected areas, wolves remained controversial. Ranchers feared for their livestock, hunters resented competition, and illegal traps still scarred the wilderness. As a guide, Daniel had stumbled across those steel jaws more than once, hidden under leaves or snow, waiting for anything unlucky enough to step inside. He hated them. He knew that no wolf, no elk, no creature deserved that kind of suffering. But he also knew the risks of interfering. Wildlife laws were strict. Touching a trapped animal without authorization could mean fines or worse. Yet Daniel's heart was not made of steel, and the forest had a way of testing a man's convictions. On one particular journey deep in the late autumn season, Daniel's group had finished their trek and returned home. He stayed behind, as he often did, to walk further into the canyons, to feel the solitude he craved. That was when the path of man and wolf would cross in a way neither would ever forget. The canyon was narrowing, the air turning sharper with every step Daniel took. He had wandered farther than usual, his boots crunching over frost-hardened leaves, when he heard it, a sound that froze him in place. Not the distant cry of a bird or the rush of a river. It was closer, a ragged whimper. Cautious, Daniel followed the noise through the underbrush. His hand rested on the handle of his knife, not from desire to use it, but from instinct. Then, in a clearing dusted with snow, he saw its steel glinting cruelly in the weak sunlight. A wolf. Its leg was caught in the jaws of an illegal trap. Blood stained the snow steam rising from the animal's heaving breaths. Its golden eyes snapped to Daniel wide with pain, but also with something he couldn't name. Fear. Defiance. Maybe even a plea. For a long moment, man and wolf stared at each other, the air between them heavy with uncertainty. Daniel's first thought was to retreat. Wolves were dangerous, unpredictable. One wrong move, and those teeth could shred him. But then the sound came again, the low, pitiful whimper of an animal in agony. And suddenly, Daniel didn't see a predator. He saw suffering. He crouched slowly, speaking in a calm voice, though he knew the wolf couldn't understand the words. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf bared its teeth, a growl rumbling in its chest, but it didn't lunge. Its body was too weak, its energy drained. Daniel studied the trap, an old steel jaw design outlawed decades ago, but still used by poachers. Releasing it would be dangerous. Minutes stretched into hours in Daniel's mind. Finally, he made his choice. He couldn't walk away. He set down his pack, pulled a length of wood from the ground, and carefully pressed against the trap's mechanism. The jaws resisted, squealing in protest. The wolf, tensed eyes blazing. With a final push, the steel gave way. The jaws snapped open, and the wolf yanked its leg free, stumbling back, blood dripping in the snow. Daniel froze, heart pounding. Was this the moment it would strike? Instead, the wolf limped a few steps, then stopped. It turned its head. Their eyes locked again, longer this time. There was no gratitude in the human sense, but something passed between them. Recognition. A silent acknowledgement that this moment mattered. The wolf vanished into the trees, leaving Daniel alone in the clearing. But the memory of that gaze would stay with him, etched into his mind like the scar the trap had left on the animal's leg. That day, Daniel thought he had simply saved a wolf. He had no idea that one day that same wolf would return the favor. In the days after the encounter, Daniel couldn't shake the image of the wolf's wounded leg. He told himself it had run far, that nature would heal what man's cruelty had broken. But late at night, under the weight of silence, doubt gnawed at him. What if the infection spread? What if the wolf's limp left it unable to hunt, unable to survive the winter storms rolling in? One evening, as Daniel followed an old elk trail deep into the pines, he heard movement behind him. His instincts flared. He turned. There, half-shrouded in shadows, stood the wolf. Thin, limping, but unmistakable. The scar on its leg caught the fading light. For a moment, fear returned. But the wolf didn't advance. It hovered at a distance, watching, breathing heavily. Something in its stance told Daniel this was no accident. The animal had sought him out. Daniel knelt, opening his pack slowly. He pulled out dried venison strips, the only food he could spare, and tossed them gently onto the ground several paces away. The wolf's ears twitched. Hesitation gave way to hunger. It crept forward, snatched the meat, and retreated into the trees. This became a ritual. Each time Daniel ventured into the forest, the wolf appeared, always cautious, never too close yet, never too far. Daniel began to carry more provisions, offering scraps when he could. In return, the wolf lingered longer, its golden eyes fixed on him as though memorizing the man who had given it freedom. But caring for a wild creature was no simple act of kindness, it was a trial. The wolf's wound worsened before it improved. Daniel once found blood in the snow, stark against the white. He followed the trail, fearing the worst, until he discovered the wolf lying weak beneath a cedar. Its breaths were shallow, its eyes dull. Desperation overtook caution. Daniel whispered soothing words, inching closer, until he could see the infection festering in the wound. He couldn't leave it. From his first aid kit, he pulled gauze, iodine, and trembling courage. Slowly, carefully, he cleaned the injury, wrapping it as best he could. The wolf growled, low eyes flashing, but it didn't strike. For that fragile hour, predator and human shared a boundary neither dared cross. The following days tested them both. Snowstorms lashed the mountains. Daniel hiked miles to check on the wolf, sometimes finding it absent, sometimes finding it waiting. Gradually, the swelling lessened, the wound closed. The wolf stood taller, its strength returning like fire rekindled from embers. Daniel witnessed behaviors he had only read about in books. The wolf would lift its head at night and release a mournful howl, the sound rolling across the canyons like a song of longing. Sometimes in the distance, faint echoes answered, perhaps its pack, perhaps only wind. Either way, Daniel felt privileged, standing in the company of something wild and eternal. But danger loomed beyond weather and wounds. Word spread in nearby towns of missing livestock, of wolves seen too close to farms. Fear painted every shadow with suspicion. When neighbors spotted Daniel hiking with food supplies, questions followed. "What are you doing out there so often? You're not feeding wolves, are you?" He denied it, knowing the law forbade feeding or harboring a predator. Yet every lie weighed heavy. If officials discovered the truth, both he and the wolf could pay the price. One bitter morning, Daniel thought he had lost it all. He arrived at the cedar grove to find no sign of the wolf. Hours passed, tracks disappearing into drifts of snow. Panic clawed at him. But just as he turned back, a familiar silhouette appeared at the tree line, eyes a light tail, low but steady. The wolf had returned, thinner, battered, but alive. Relief surged through Daniel, almost knocking him to his knees. The bond was no longer imagined. It was real. Fragile, yes. Forbidden, perhaps, but undeniable. In saving each other from hunger, cold, and loneliness, man and wolf had forged something ancient, something both dangerous and sacred. And though Daniel didn't yet realize it, these trials were only a prelude. The true test, the storm that would push them both to their limits, was still to come. Winter in the northern Rockies is not just a season, it is a force. The snow comes heavy, relentless, burying trails and silencing rivers. Storms can arrive without warning, dropping walls of white that erase the world in minutes. Daniel had endured many winters, but this one would test him in ways he never imagined. It began with a distant rumble like thunder, but deeper. The sky turned an eerie gray-green, clouds rolling over the ridges faster than he could follow. Daniel had been out longer than planned, tracking elk prints near the high canyons. When the wind shifted and snow began to fall sideways, he knew he was in trouble. He pulled his coat tighter, pushing forward toward familiar paths. But visibility dropped to almost nothing. Pine trees' blurred shadows melted into white. Each step became heavier, his breath sharper in his chest. The storm was swallowing him whole. Then movement. Out of the storm's chaos, a figure appeared, the wolf. Stronger now, its scar barely visible beneath thick winter fur. It stood with ears pinned back against the wind, eyes locked on Daniel. Daniel hesitated. Could he trust the animal to guide him? Or was this only coincidence? But when the wolf darted forward, stopping to glance back, the answer was clear. It wanted him to follow. And so he did. For hours they battled the blizzard together. The wolf led along ridges Daniel barely recognized, weaving through drifts and frozen gullies. When Daniel stumbled, the wolf circled back, barking a short, urgent sound, half warning, half command. It was as if the animal understood the stakes. At one point, Daniel collapsed against a snowbank, his body shivering uncontrollably. His vision blurred, darkness tugging at the edges. Hypothermia was near. He thought of his father, of stories told by the fire, of warnings that winter claimed the careless. He thought this might be the end. But then he felt warmth, rough, unexpected. The wolf had pressed close, its body shielding him from the wind, its breath hot against his face. For long minutes, man and predator huddled together, sharing what little heat could keep life burning. With renewed strength, Daniel pushed himself up. "Not yet," he whispered through chattering teeth. "Not yet." The wolf howled once, a piercing cry that cut through the storm, and moved again. Daniel followed, stumbling but determined. At last the storm began to break. The sky lightened, snow still falling, but softer, less punishing. In the distance, Daniel saw it, the outline of a hunter's cabin, abandoned but sturdy. The wolf had led him there. Inside, Daniel lit a fire, his hands trembling as warmth returned to his body. Outside, through the frost-covered window, he saw the wolf. It stood in the snow, silent, watching. No chains bound them, no words passed between them. Yet in that moment, Daniel knew they had crossed a threshold few humans ever would. The wolf turned and disappeared into the forest, its silhouette fading into the storm's last veil. Daniel was left with the fire's crackle, and a truth he couldn't deny: this animal had saved his life. By spring, the snow began to melt. Rivers roared with fresh runoff, and green shoots pushed through the forest floor. For Daniel, the change in seasons brought relief, but also a new kind of tension. The wolf had grown stronger, its winter coat sleek and thick, its limp barely noticeable. It no longer appeared weak or desperate. Instead, it carried the presence of what it truly was: a wild predator, powerful and commanding. And people noticed. Neighbors began to whisper. Hikers claimed they'd seen Daniel walking in the forest with a wolf trailing behind. Farmers muttered about missing calves, quick to blame predators that wandered too close. Rumors spread faster than truth ever could. One afternoon, a ranger knocked on Daniel's door. The man's uniform bore the patch of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. His words were firm, if not hostile. "We've had reports. You haven't been feeding wolves, have you?" Daniel swallowed, careful with his reply. "No," he said. "I respect the laws." The ranger's eyes lingered on him, as though weighing the honesty in his voice. Finally, he gave a curt nod and left. But the warning hung heavy in the air. The truth was, Daniel had crossed a dangerous line. Wolves were protected under federal and state law. Feeding them, treating them, even creating regular contact could be seen as harassment of wildlife. Penalties ranged from steep fines to jail time. More than that, if officials believed the wolf had grown dependent on humans, they might capture it, or worse. Daniel wrestled with guilt. He never wanted to tame the animal, never sought to make it his. His help had been an act of mercy, nothing more. But the bond was undeniable. Each time he entered the forest, the wolf found him. And each time, Daniel felt the pull between his heart and the law. The conflict deepened when local ranchers held a meeting. They were angry, demanding protection for their herds. "If the government won't do something," one shouted, "we will." Eyes turned toward Daniel, suspicion sharp. He was the outsider, the man too comfortable with predators. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His cabin walls felt like a cage, the weight of community pressure pressing in. He stepped outside into the cool night air. There in the distance, a howl rose low, haunting familiar. The wolf was near. Daniel realized what others would never understand. The animal wasn't chained by his kindness. It had chosen to return. But choice or not, danger was closing in. The world of men would not allow this bond to last. And deep down, Daniel knew the wolf was changing too. Its eyes no longer held weakness, but the restless spark of a creature meant to roam free, to lead, or follow its own kind. It was growing beyond him, beyond the fragile shelter of their secret connection. The day was coming when Daniel would face the hardest decision of his life. The weight of choice had been pressing on Daniel for weeks. Each time the wolf appeared at the edge of the trees, strong and proud. Again Daniel felt the same mixture of awe and dread. He knew what the law demanded. He knew what the neighbors whispered. And most of all, he knew what the wolf itself needed. It was no longer the injured creature he had freed from iron jaws. It was no longer the fragile shadow he had tended through winter storms. This wolf had become what it was meant to be, wild, resilient, untamed. And so Daniel prepared himself for the inevitable. One morning he rose before dawn. The air was cool, the sky painted in faint hues of silver and rose. He packed little, just his knife, his canteen, and the strength to let go. He walked into the forest until he reached the ridge where he and the wolf had first locked eyes months ago. He didn't have to wait long. From the shadows the wolf emerged head high, eyes steady. For the first time Daniel noticed how large it had grown. Its shoulders rippled with muscle. Its stance carried the quiet authority of a creature ready to lead. Daniel's throat tightened. "You don't belong to me," he whispered. "You never did." He knelt, opening his pack one final time. Inside, he had placed the last of his dried meat, a silent offering. The wolf stepped forward, cautiously took the food, then paused. It didn't retreat immediately. Instead, it lingered, eyes fixed on Daniel with a depth that felt almost human. Tears burned Daniel's eyes. He forced himself to stand, to raise his arm toward the horizon, where the forest stretched endless and free. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Go. Live your life. Run where you're meant to run." The wolf didn't move at first. Then it lifted its head and released a long, haunting howl. The sound pierced the morning air, rolling across the valley like a farewell carved into the sky. Slowly, the wolf turned. Step by step, it moved toward the trees, its body swallowed by the shadows of pine. But just before disappearing completely, it stopped. It looked back. For one suspended moment, time held still. Daniel saw not just an animal, but a partner in survival, a witness to his own humanity. That gaze carried everything they had endured: the trap, the storms, the nights of fear and hope. Then the wolf vanished. Daniel stood alone on the ridge, the silence around him deeper than any he had ever known. His chest ached, but he understood. This was the cost of respect, to let the wild remain wild, even when it tears your heart apart. As he walked back to his cabin, the forest felt different, emptier, but also fuller, as if the bond remained even without presence. He would never forget the wolf. And though he believed this was the end, fate was not finished with their story. Months passed. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to the early chill of autumn. Daniel carried on with his guiding work, leading groups through the mountains, but something was missing. Every bend in the trail, every howl carried on the wind, reminded him of the wolf he had set free. Life, however, has a way of weaving stories back together when least expected. It happened during a solo trek late in the season. Daniel had hiked alone into a narrow canyon to scout for a new route. The day had been clear, but weather in the Rockies turns fast. A sudden rock slide broke loose above him. The ground trembled. Stones crashed down, one striking his shoulder, another pinning his leg. When the dust cleared, Daniel lay trapped against the canyon wall, pain searing through his body. He tried to move, but the rock wouldn't budge. Hours slipped away. The sun sank. Cold crept in, cruel and steady. He called out, but no one was near enough to hear. As darkness closed in, despair took hold. He thought of his family, of unfinished stories, of the wolf he had released to freedom. "Maybe this is how it ends," he whispered. Then from the mouth of the canyon came a sound he knew better than any, a howl. Daniel's heart jolted. Out of the shadows stepped a wolf, strong, commanding eyes glowing gold in the fading light. The scar on its leg caught the moon's reflection. It was him. The same wolf he had freed, the same wolf he had let go. The wolf didn't approach recklessly. Instead, it tilted its head back and howled again, loud, long, piercing the night. Minutes later, faint echoes answered. Not wolves this time. Human voices. Search and rescue teams had been combing the area. They heard the sound, traced it, followed it through the canyon's maze. Within the hour, flashlights cut through the darkness. Rescuers freed Daniel from the rock and carried him to safety. As they worked, Daniel looked past the beams of light. On the ridge above the wolf stood watching. Their eyes met once more, and in that gaze lay something beyond explanation, recognition, memory, a silent bond forged through suffering and survival. The rescuers never noticed the animal slip away. By the time Daniel was lifted onto the stretcher, the ridge was empty, the night silent again. But Daniel knew. He had not been alone. Back in town, word spread quickly. People marveled at the coincidence, though few believed the wolf had truly been involved. But Daniel didn't argue. Some truths weren't meant for debate. For him, it was enough to know the circle had closed. The life he had saved his in return. From that day on, Daniel's respect for the wild grew even deeper. He guided with more reverence, teaching hikers not only about the beauty of the land, but about the fragile, powerful ties that connect all living things. And every now and then, when the moon was high and the valleys echoed with distant howls, Daniel would pause, smile, and whisper into the night, "Thank you." Every story leaves behind a lesson. This one, carved in snow and scars, reminds us of something ancient and enduring. The bond between humans and the wild is fragile, but it is real. Daniel's journey with the wolf was never about ownership, never about control. It was about recognition, one life, seeing another one act of mercy, returned in a way no one could have imagined. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Kindness ripples. The smallest choice to free a trapped animal to show respect instead of fear can shape destinies. For Daniel, it meant survival. For the wolf, it meant freedom. For us, it means remembering that our actions matter even when no one is watching. Science tells us that wolves once roamed North America in staggering numbers, nearly 2 million strong. By the mid-20th century, humans had hunted them nearly to extinction in the lower 48 states. Their return through conservation and reintroduction has restored balance to ecosystems that had faltered in their absence. Yellowstone's rivers run differently today because wolves came back. Elk herds move smarter, vegetation thrives, and entire landscapes heal. But these victories remain fragile. Wolves are still misunderstood, still threatened by illegal traps, habitat loss, and conflict with humans. The survival of this species depends on choices we make, choices of compassion, of coexistence, of responsibility. Daniel's story may feel extraordinary, but at its heart lies a truth we can all embrace. Respect the wild, and it may one day respect us back. So the next time you hear a wolf's howl drifting across the night sky, remember this tale. It is not just the voice of the wilderness. It is a reminder that gratitude, survival, and connection transcend the boundaries between species. And as Daniel himself would tell you, sometimes the life you save is the one that saves you.